G'day, it's Coach Pete from Ascension. On this Whiteboard Wednesday, we're going to talk about basic fitness qualities. Before we look at what the three sort of key physical qualities are, we need to go back a step and look at something we've talked about before, which is the body's energy systems. At the end of the day, all physical activity, including training and sport and exercise, are really expressions of work. And work is simply the application of energy. That is the transfer and movement of energy somehow in our body. Now, our body has a few different forms of work, which we talked about in the past. We really need to look at mechanical work, because that is what we care about the most when it comes to training, whether we're looking at a professional level, semi-professional, amateur, or just recreationally. A few of our body systems, including the muscular system, our skeletal system, and our nervous system, work together, and they use energy, which generates mechanical work. The end result of that mechanical work is physical movement. That is, parts of our body will move. When we start looking at physics, work can be expressed a few different ways, but we can break work down, that is the application of energy, into three key components: force, velocity, and time. Force is how hard, velocity is simply speed or how fast, and time for how long. So we can do work a few different ways. We can do work hard, fast, or long. And really all physical activity is a derivative in some form or another of work. That is, we're doing a specific amount of work, we're applying a certain force at a certain velocity for a given amount of time. What you can do is plot these three key variables of force, velocity, and time onto a triangle. And if you picture at the apex of the triangle, time, then at the base on one side we'll have force and the other side will have velocity. All physical activity, all sport, all training sits somewhere inside that triangle. Let's say we've got 1,000 joules of energy and we want to do some work with it, just for shits and giggles. How we can do that 1,000 joules of energy as work sits somewhere in that triangle. If we want to be high force, we're going to be lower in velocity, and we're going to be able to do it over a shorter period of time. If we want maximum velocity, we're going to have less amounts of force, less amounts of time. And if we want maximum time, it's going to have to be at lower force and lower velocity. That really is what all our training and all the physical qualities boil down to in their simplest sense. Now, there are a shit ton of other physical qualities that people will tell you about, things like skill, accuracy, power, but in reality, they're all either specific to a given sport or they're a form of the three main qualities I've spoken about. Now, if we take that same triangle and we can change the language to look at a few different words we're more familiar with when it comes to physical training, whether it's for high performance or recreation. And as opposed to time, so being able to do something for a long period of time, we typically call that endurance. Being able to apply something at a high amount of force, we typically call strength. And to be able to apply something at high velocity, we typically call speed. So just by looking at work, which consists of force, velocity, and time, we've now broken it down to three other terms we're really familiar with, of endurance, strength, and speed. And they are really our three key fitness qualities. That's not to say that we only have to train one or two of those qualities. Every sport and every physical pursuit will have different amounts of each, and to prioritize one comes at the cost of the other two. Or to prioritize two comes at a compromise between those two qualities and the loss of one. The other major fitness quality you'll hear a lot of people talk about and throw around, especially on the interwebs, is power. And what is power? It's simply the application of force at a high velocity. So if you want absolute force, that is absolute strength, it cannot be done fast. Same. Absolute velocity cannot be done with a high external load. Look at two sports, really simply: powerlifting and the 100-meter sprint. Powerlifting is a classic example of strength or force. You want to apply the maximum amount of force possible to lift a bar and squat, bench press, and deadlift. The closer and closer you get to your 1 repetition maximum, the slower lift will be. And that sport is effectively doing a 1 rep max in those 3 lifts. Now we look at sprinting. You want to have your body moving at the maximum velocity or the maximum speed it can. What would make you slower? by having extra weight. That is, you cannot run at the same speed with a 10 kilogram vest on than what you can without it. Adding external load or resistance that requires more force will make you slower. So power really is a form of strength speed or speed strength. If we also picture our triangle with endurance at the top, strength down the bottom left, and speed at the bottom right, we see as we come down the triangle, that is, as we get further away from endurance or time, intensity is increasing. That is, physical activity in any capacity which requires high force or high velocity, that is, a large amount of strength or a large amount of speed, is higher in intensity. We've talked about our body's muscle fibers and our energy systems. We know that as something gets more intense, we move from the aerobic to the anaerobic. And if we look at our anaerobic energy systems, we look at the glycotic, then we move in the ATP-PC. So we can see how these three basic qualities, energy systems and muscle fibers, relate to each other. Endurance is low intensity. Strength and speed are both high intensity. We can also look at the pyramid a different way. If we now move to the bottom right and look at speed, as we move further and further away from speed, rather obviously, things get slower. That is, activity which is either high in endurance or it's high in absolute strength is actually slow. That is, physical activity that's high in strength or high in endurance will generally get slower and slower as we get closer and closer to those other two parts of the pyramid. And we'll find there's a compromise between strength and endurance, which is occasionally called strength endurance. That is, being able to repeat efforts of external resistance for time. And some sports and some physical activities will require you to be able to repeat an amount of force over time. That is a blend between strength and endurance. So you still have to have a lower velocity work output at a relatively higher intensity, but for as long as possible. The last way I look at the triangle is to consider strength in the bottom left corner. That is, things that require maximum force. Exercises that require the most amount of force are exercises where there is external load. You have to move something more than just your body, whether it's a barbell, heavy stones, or anything else. As we move further away from strength, more towards either speed or endurance, the amount of force or external load your body can handle at these other types of exercises reduces. That is, you cannot apply maximum endurance or maximum speed with a high external load. Now, sports will not necessarily fit neatly into one or two of these physical qualities and may require elements of all three. We take Mac, for example, who's a golfer. Now, golf, specifically the swing, is actually really high power. So he has to move a relatively lightweight, being a club, at a high velocity in order to exert a large amount of force onto the ball for it to move as far as possible or as close to possible to the hole he's trying to aim for. So we class that as power. That is an application of strength and speed or force and velocity. So golf, specifically the swing, is high power. Now for Mac, he has to hit 18 holes. So there's still an element of endurance. That is, he can't just do one really good swing and the competition is over. Absolute best case, if he gets a hole in one on all 18 holes, he's only going to do it 18 times. But that's not realistic. Golf games go for more than 18 swings per golfer. And we also consider things like putting in short game, where he needs to actually vary the amount of force and velocity he applies in order to gain more accuracy. The other thing with Mac is he has to move around a golf course. He then has to carry his golf clubs to all the holes in succession. So with him, in a simple sense, we see a mixture of power when he's swinging and a requirement for a bit more endurance to move between the 18 holes in order to complete a game. Now, other people will tell you there's more than 3 fitness qualities, and they're probably right. But at the end of the day, these 3 are the simplest and most important of all fitness qualities that you can work on. But at the end of the day, physical activity, which is the use of energy to do work, is some form of force, velocity, and time, or strength, speed, and endurance. The key takeaway from this Whiteboard Wednesday is really understanding physics at a real basic sense. That is, work is simply force by velocity by time, which means that work, or the use of energy by our body, really is just an application of strength at a speed over a given endurance. Now, I haven't talked about the other fitness qualities that come up, except for maybe power. They're still important, but at the end of the day, they're relative to what you're doing. People bring up things like flexibility. Yes, flexibility is really important for a whole bunch of sports. Being more flexible is not always beneficial. It's more auxiliary or secondary when we look at the big three, which are really strength, speed, endurance. Thanks for tuning in this Whiteboard Wednesday. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and maybe even Twitter.